So something I want to talk about is National Bolshevism, or Nazbols. Lately I've been seeing a lot of Nazi pseudo-communist people on my video recommendations. I don't know why. Maybe some of my friends are liking them. I don't know. So essentially there is this fringe group of people that believe in National Socialism and take it to a literal stance. Now, whether or not I believe that Hitler or the Nazis were indeed National Socialists, or if they were just reactionary fascists that excused capitalism under the pretense of being a labor party, and, whether or not they were racist or any of that isn't my concern right now. Well, my concern here in this topic is whether or not National Socialism is a branch of socialism and therefore a branch of Marxism, which it comes down to whether or not you consider them an ally against the bourgeoisie. And that's the big debate. And this comes back to my Paragon versus Renegade alignment fiasco, because you either have ideological purity on one side, or you have the enemy of my enemy is my friend on the other. And I do not trust fascism of any kind, and that's the problem. We use fascism interchangeably for all these different ideologies, and that's where all this confusion stems from. I do it personally. Sometimes I use fascism to represent just authoritarian capitalism, and then sometimes I use fascism to represent hyper-nationalism. And there is a difference. The only real similarity between them is they're both totalitarian, but that's not enough to go on. And the fact here is authoritarian capitalism I have a big problem with. Hyper-nationalism I have a problem with, but I can keep it to myself. I can subside my strong disagreement with it in favor of more so worrying about authoritarian capitalism, which is the problem we have right now. A better way of saying it would be, do you care more about fascism or imperialism? That's really what capitalism is, imperialism. They want to bomb foreign countries for money. They want to rule over the people for money. They want to keep people stupid for money. Everything's about fucking money. And hyper-nationalism isn't about that. Hyper-nationalism is this notion that the entire country or a race or something is one big superorganism. And I've talked about this in the past too. The superorganism. Right now, in most Western societies, the superorganism is vague. People say society, people, blah blah blah, but it's a superorganism. It is this institution, this matrix that exists and is this enormous entity that more or less persuades people into one mode of thinking, but people do not wish to define it. They do not define it as their country, their religion, their race, and these are very pressing matters, because it is realistic to suggest that yes, people do think of themselves as one giant organism, more so in their country or religion than their race, and I would not ever seek to consider the race a superorganism. It would be impossible to, in my opinion. People have different beliefs, and they're going to have those different beliefs whether or not they're of the same race. I think racism of any kind is just retarded. Whether or not it's positive racism to unite people, to protect yourselves, whatever bullshit excuse you got going on. And that's my problem with Nazism, National Bolshevism, things like that, is deep down it's a race-oriented philosophy. Even if it's under the pretense of hyper-nationalism, of, the country identity, or the religious identity. Really, they don't have a religious identity, so I don't even need to go there. Mostly, they claim the country identity. But National Bolshevists exist in many countries, mostly in European countries. So what are you going to do? Are you going to have a National Bolshevist branch for England and Germany and Italy and everything between separately? Are you going to consider yourselves separate superorganisms? What happens when you disagree on subject matters? Are you going to go to war with each other? Are you going to just cut off ties with each other? That's the problem here. That's the problem with nationalism, is the fact that it doesn't unite the people. You just have something else to argue over. And what do you think's going to happen when you argue over those things? The bourgeoisie is going to come and manipulate you. That's the problem with revisionism. That was the problem with social democracy, the thing Trotsky was advocating. Trotsky was advocating democratic socialism, liberal socialism, etc. And the problem was that he failed to comprehend how easy it is for the bourgeoisie to take any opportunity to manipulate the public, to manipulate the mindset of the people, to manipulate the the superorganism. So that's my problem with all these nationalist variants. Because whether or not they are opposed to capitalism, can they really stop capitalism? And I think the answer is no. Clearly they haven't done a very good job, and there are many countries that are nationalists. Iran is nationalist, North Korea is nationalist, Cuba is nationalist, and guess what? Imperialism is still fucking them. They have to kind of walk around them. They have to kind of be subtle about it. They can't just bomb their countries like the religious fundamentalists in the Middle East, but they're doing it, and they're integrating their own capitalist philosophies into these nationalist states because nationalism does not believe in the Marxist ideology. They believe the nation comes first. And when the nation comes first, they're willing to compromise with capital owners and allow people to have private property, and then those private property owners can exploit the means of production, exploit whatever property they have, and little by little, they lose more and more of their own ideology. They lose more and more of what they fought for in the first place. That's why I have a problem with National Socialists, with National Bolshevists, or whatever you want to call yourself. Nationalism doesn't work. Now, whether or not that means that they're as terrible as, we typically make them out to be, I do not believe that either. I do not believe a word imperialism propaganda says. I'll put it that way. Anything they say about anyone, I'm going to take with a grain of salt. Because if it were up to all the bullshit history revisionism out there, we'd all be dead. No one ever would be alive. Because if you combine all the people Hitler killed, all the people Stalin killed, all the people Chairman Mao killed, there would just be nobody left alive. It'd be ridiculous to believe those stories. And a lot of so-called communists were nationalists. Stalin specifically. I don't even think Mao was a nationalist. Mao was a third worldist. He believed in communism, but he also believed that the first world was a danger to the rest of the world, because he saw instantly how the first world was manipulating the third world into doing all the work for them and depleting them of their natural resources and basically just letting them starve while the first world got to live it up. And everyone in the first world got to live comfortably and stupid. They knew nothing about all the enslavement and all the torture that went on in the third world and got to enjoy their technology, their washing machines and colored television sets, or nowadays their iPods and, pop music and cell phones and things like that. It hasn't changed in practically 100 years. It's the same bullshit. So, in that regard, I do not consider Mao a nationalist. He was far too inclusive to be a Maoist. To be a nationalist. But, nationalism itself is dangerous because it fails to comprehend the severity of capitalism, the severity of the bourgeoisie's ability to manipulate our minds. And, I focus on internet rights. I focus on how we can get rid of moderators and free the internet from the stranglehold of the bourgeoisie. Anyone claiming to own a website, anyone at all, is the enemy. Anyone claiming that they have the right to abuse people because of their ownership of a website is the enemy. And I'm not touting a message of how we are this identity based off any kind of identifying factor. I want nothing to do with distinguishing people by race, religion, creed, national origins, anything. The point should be, we need to get moderators off their fucking high horse, pull the shirts off their back, and throw them in the streets, muddy them up, and just slap them across the face. Anyone claiming to own a website and that gives them leeway to treat people like shit and censor them and ban them and do whatever they want to them needs to be approached with extreme caution and then punched in the face. That's it. The capital owners are the problem, not any specific identity. And nationalism will never grasp that concept. At the end of the day, nationalism is either worried about preserving its own identity or condemning people of another identity. And I just needed to say that. I needed to say that while we can debate whether or not to, tolerate these different ideological standpoints, we cannot ignore the fact that some ideologies are just not healthy, and they're not going to do anything about the problem. So leave a comment in the comment section about whether or not you agree or disagree that nationalism is a self-defeating prophecy. It is it's self-destructive and will always cater to the bourgeoisie whether or not they want it to. Even if that wasn't their intention, that's what is going to end up happening. Because hyper-nationalists will subsidize big business, too big to fail, and they'll do it to preserve their identity. And whereas a communist state would never conceive the idea, even if it would mean the destruction of their so-called nation, they would never subdue themselves in the name of profit. They would never subdue themselves in the name of letting private capital owners benefit while everybody else suffers. So, give that some thought.